Alright, looks like we've gotten as many people as we're going to get, so let's start the panel. Hello, my name is Aiden Tamke. I am a college freshman at George Mason University down in Fredericksburg. Yeah, this is just a thing I did because it seemed like an interesting thing to do. Hello, sir. Yeah, we're just trying to panel. Yeah, I'm not doing a thesis. I might do a research project on this, but I'm not sure. This was just a fun activity. Yeah, please let me know if there's any information I'm missing, just that I can improve this if I ever decide to do this panel again. This will be a presentation with a slight Q&A format, so if you have any questions throughout, just feel free to raise your hands. Yeah, I do kind of like having conversations in the middle of these. Any questions, anyone? Fantastic. Okay, so this panel, what is this panel about? The top bit was the description as it appeared in the guidebook. I assume if you're here, it's because you read that, so that's generally what that's about. So the main things I'm going to be covering are who Lovecraft was. He was the creator of cosmic horror, exactly what cosmic horror is, so just creating a definition for us to use in the context of analyzing how it's been portrayed in games, and more specifically, looking at the way cosmic horror has been portrayed through the lens of specific games. Admittedly, if I could change one thing about this description, I'm going to be going into far more detail about video games than card games or board games. I was planning to do more about card games and board games, but just because of the time limitations, both within this panel and the amount of time I had to research, I don't feel like I could have done it well enough to be worth the effort. Okay, so moving forward. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, lived from 1890 to 1937, so early 20th century. That's also when he wrote most of his writings. He wrote for the Weird Tales magazine, as well as a couple other pulp magazines. He was never really incredibly renowned in his time. He never really made all that money off of it, all that much money off of it. In fact, most of the time he just lived off of the inheritance he got from his father and lived with several family members. He had a wife briefly, but they separated after a while. Influences included the poet Lord Dunsany and the father of Gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe. You can actually see several different writing phases. His earliest phase was darkly inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. That was his work, such as Herbert West Reanimator. Things he wrote include Herbert West Reanimator, Call of Cthulhu, The History of the Necronomicon, The Shadow over Innsmouth, and At the Mountains of Madness. So that's when he got most of his writing done. Round about World War I, shortly after that as well, round about the 30s, 20s, round about that time. Contributions to fiction include the idea of eldritch monstrosities, so things like Cthulhu, Dagon, other works in fiction. If you've seen the Hellboy movie or read the comics, that's features a Lovecraftian type entity, and that's the entire plot of the first movie. Alien geometries. Oh, hello. The easiest way to explain an alien geometry is basically imagine a triangle with 3 right angles. It's a sort of shape that can't really exist in our reality just because of the limits of space and physics, but can exist on a higher plane or lower plane of reality. So basically an other dimensional shape that is somehow here, that we can't really perceive just on our level. The Necronomicon, the Necronomicon, so that is the Book of the Dead. Originally it was referenced as being created by Ibn al-Hazred, the Mad Arab. It was always generally a bit vague as to what it actually was in fiction, in the Cthulhu mythos, but it was generally the giant book full of all the ancient knowledge that people generally weren't supposed to know. The scientifically resurrected zombie. So in his work, Herbert West Reanimator, as you can see there, which he wrote for a magazine, that book was all about a scientist resurrecting a dead body. He wrote it inspired by Mary Shelley and her Frankenstein book. Up to that point, zombies had always existed in the confines of being resurrected by voodoo magic or some other magical means, but he was the first one to take the idea that Mary Shelley created of using the science to resurrect a body and have that be the cause of a zombie outbreak. So things like Resident Evil, that's inspired by Lovecraft. And the creepy town with creepy people. If any of you have read The Shadow over Innsmouth, that's the originator of that. The protagonist goes to a town, everyone's acting vaguely weird. Turns out the entire town secretly wants to murder you, and then you go out and turns out there's a much larger thing going on, and either you die or everyone else dies, or something dies generally. Any questions or clarifications? Cool. Aesthetic characteristics. So, tentacles. If you see a giant tentacly monster, again, safe bet it's Lovecraft. Slimes and other viscous fluids. One thing Lovecraft was never really into was just the idea of spilling blood and guts everywhere. He tended to do a lot more with slimes and protoplasms and things like that. The Shoggoth, for example, is described as a protoplasmic mass with a bunch of eyes everywhere. While he wasn't into blood and gore, one thing he was into was body horror, so things Cronenberging into other things. So as you can see there, the guy slowly transforming into the creepy fish man, one of the deep ones. So yeah, those are just some of the things where, if you see it, it's a safe bet it's Lovecraft inspired. What is cosmic horror? The broad idea of cosmic horror is the insignificance of humanity on the cosmic scale of reality. So, if you've ever gone into Google Earth, just zoom out as far as you can go, and that is what it's like reading cosmic horror. It's, we are almost less than nothing on the cosmic scale of reality, and that is what cosmic horror is supposed to make you feel like. It involves unknowable beings of omnipotent powers, so things like Cthulhu Dagon, that we are only really alive because either they don't notice us or we're not worth their time to destroy. So less malicious intent towards these giant, towards us from these giant monsters, more not worth their time to destroy. And the other part of it is that if we're trying to understand the cosmic, we're not supposed to. So if you're trying to understand the secrets of the deep ones, they are literally unknowable. Yeah, you could not wrap your mind around the sheer amount of power and their effect on reality. Yeah, that's why people going insane is such a big part of Lovecraft. Just, you will go insane if you try to figure out what's going on around here. Okay. The four things I'll be primarily analyzing here are the narrative, aesthetics, combat, and mechanics. So narrative refers strictly to the story, how they bring across the story throughout the games. The aesthetics, so aesthetics are what the game looks and feels like. So the art, the animation, things like that. The theming around the game. The combat, that's pretty straightforward. That's just if and how you fight with enemies throughout the game, or lack thereof. And the mechanics. So the mechanics refers to the individual elements within a game that, around which it turns. So if this was a shooter, one of the mechanics would be the regain health over time, or health packs, or things like that. Everyone good? First game, Cthulhu Dice. Yeah, the basic premise of that game is that each player has a collection of stones, and you roll the dice, and you either take stones or put stones back in the pile, and whoever has stones at the end of the game wins. The aesthetics of this are, they use the visuals of Lovecraft, but none of the themes. As you can tell from the way I just described it, there's nothing about this game that really enforces anything about what cosmic horror is about. They just took the Cthulhu imagery and name and put it onto a game that you could otherwise have themed around anything else. If you took Cthulhu Dice and replaced everything with Alice in Wonderland imagery or Doctor Who imagery and just changed the pictures, you could replace it with anything. Yeah, so you could yeah, you could replace the visuals with anything and the game would still work. In order to truly be a cosmic horror game, the elements of the game could be such that it wouldn't work if you replaced the elements with anything else. There are games like Cthulhu Flux, which I saw over there, which, despite being themed around other things, it makes sense for it to be a cosmic horror game because the shifting rules will constantly mirror the shifting elements of reality. Next game, Undertale. Quick thing, has anyone here not played Undertale? Darn. Well, spoilers for Undertale. Sorry, darn. I assume most people have played it. But yeah, this thing up there is one of the last monsters of the game, and if you've seen anything of Undertale, you notice that that thing does not look like anything else in Undertale. Undertale looks like a bunch of cartoony characters, so uses a kind of modern 2010s cartoon aesthetic. Everyone has rounded eyes. That looks like something you would create using Photoshop and like 1,000 different things, and it looks absolutely terrifying. The reason I brought this up was that, do any of you watch anime? Cool. Yeah, how many of you have seen Madoka Magica? Cool. Yeah, this is a thing that Madoka Magica does similarly. Every time the characters go into one of the witch labyrinths, the art style will actually change. So it will shift from an anime aesthetic to, say, a 1920s aesthetic or a different art style entirely. And this is interesting because it's a way of portraying an otherworldly reality. So this monster is differentiated from all the entities that naturally occur within the game. So you would not mistake this for anything else that exists in the game, and indeed, if you were within that game and you saw this, you would have no frame of reference for what this was supposed to look like. It's something that you can't really do in live action, but it is something you can do in animation. Just looking at a thing that the characters themselves would have no frame of reference for perceiving. The Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. This is one of the more famous cosmic horror games. That's because of its use of a sanity meter. So that game, you're exploring a haunted mansion and running around trying to solve an adventure, but as your character slowly comes into more and more contact with otherworldly entities and just the supernatural, you actually have a sanity bar that will slowly be depleted. And after, there are two different sections of the bar. Once it goes past the first bar, your character will start to notice weird and creepy things. The example that's shown on screen is that it will actually pretend to delete your save data. So actually screwing with you within the confines of the game itself. Yeah, it's something you can't really do in a non-interactive medium, so a film couldn't just pause itself and then pretend to delete itself off your hard drive, for example. It's something you can only really do within the confines of the game. Other examples in the game include pretending to turn your volume down and just other things within the gameplay itself. You'll sometimes be walking on the ceiling. Sometimes you'll start hearing more subtle audio-visual elements, things like that. Hello. So just things will start to change, and that will portray how the character is responding to the supernatural elements within the game. You will physically start to see how your character is starting to perceive the world just within, as they're starting to perceive these otherworldly elements. This is going a lot faster than I thought it would.
Have you already covered Darkest Dungeon?
No, the second person asked me about this, but I don't actually bring up Darkest Dungeon within this. I did bring up Undertale in the last one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah, I'll go over that at the end if you want.
That's cool.
The Consuming Shadow. Does anybody know what this is? Cool. This game was created by Yahtzee Croshaw. If you've ever heard of the term PC Master Race, he's the guy who did that. He creates the video series Zero Punctuation, but he also makes games in his spare time. This is one he made. It's roguelike exploration game. You run around exploring dungeons, trying to stop the giant Lovecraftian monsters that are about to destroy England. So the main difference between this game and Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, they both have a sanity meter, but the way that this game handles a sanity meter is much different than Eternal Darkness. Whereas in the previous one, the main way it portrayed your character's loss of sanity was you would physically start to see the world change around you, you know, pretending you're walking on the ceiling, you're walking on the floor, you're starting to hear axe scrapings in the other room, things like that. This game, the main effect of you starting to lose sanity is a prompt that you might actually accidentally click on that, ask you to do a QuickTime event in which you try to prevent yourself from killing yourself. So a text will pop up on screen, and you have to move the gun away from your head to stop yourself from killing yourself. One of the complaints I heard about Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem is that you're kind of encouraged to play at low sanity just to see all the fun different effects you can get. So you're not supposed to want to be able to see all the fun, weird, scary things that happen, but it's kind of more interesting when you do. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're technically at a disadvantage, but it's more fun to play that way. This game, it is decidedly not fun to have to do a QuickTime event. You are actively punished for having low sanity at a given point. And it actually gets harder to regain as you go along because the resource you use to regain your sanity actually becomes less effective over time. And different resources use sanity and deplete sanity, so it's all part of the roguelike thing. Any questions? Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Anybody hear of this? Cool. Yeah, it was an independent horror game, came out a few years ago. It was the favorite game for people who love to let's play games and then scream at them for a while. Combat. There is no combat in this game. You cannot, if you see the giant scary monster thing right there, you cannot punch that or hit that or have any way of fighting against it. Your only hope is to run away. You cannot fight against this monster in any way, and in fact you're actively discouraged from even looking at them. Yeah, you're discouraged from even looking at them because this game also has a sanity effect, and even while you're looking at them, your sanity meter will go down, and that makes the game harder to play. The screen starts to go wibbly wobbly, and just everything gets scary. Yeah, this is interesting in Cosmic Horror because you are presented an adversary who you physically cannot fight against. Yeah, you are. Yeah, the giant scary monster that you are physically incapable of fighting against, portraying the inevitability of losing in Cosmic Horror. Silent Hill 2. Who's heard of this? Cool, a few more people. Fantastic. Alright. So I don't have to explain what that game is about. Okay, interesting thing about this game is that there is combat, but if you've played Silent Hill 2, the combat is awful. If you are trying to fight your way through the game, it is the most awkward kind of thing ever. Bullets are a finite resource, and it's just awkward and clunky to try to shoot all the different monsters. And in contrast to Amnesia: The Dark Descent, where you can't fight anything and and everything is scary and it's encouraged to make you scary, this game has monsters, but fighting them doesn't seem to make the situation better. So you can fight and kill as many monsters as you want, but it's not really that fun to do so, and fighting them doesn't make the situation better. The monsters will in fact ignore you most of the time. Pyramid Head is the only enemy that will pursue you throughout the game. Every other enemy you can just walk past generally and not have to worry about them chasing you afterwards. It's almost like the monsters have bigger problems than you, which helps with the feeling of oppressive dread. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth. This game is interesting because you kill Dagon, You actually kill a couple different eldritch monstrosities. So you fight a Dagon, you fight Shoggoth, you fight Mother Hydra. So you can actually kill these giant Lovecraftian entities who are supposed to be on levels of godlike power. You are given a gun. It starts off kind of survival horror-y, but not really. It kind of fades off in just a standard first-person shooter. At the end, you're actually given a laser gun to fight the final boss, Mother Hydra. And it takes away from the feeling of cosmic horror because you can't really be facing off against a godlike being of omnipotent and unknowable power if you can just shoot it and make it go away. Even in games where you can seal away the power, you're basically killing it, but doing it with another name. You are not supposed to be able to do anything against these giant unknowable monsters. Yeah. Bloodborne. This game is basically the anti-cosmic horror game. How many of you played Bloodborne? Awesome. So, as you can see in this game, or in the screenshot rather, you're actually fighting these giant elder gods. So Ebriatus, Daughter of the Cosmos, you fight a couple other ones, the Moon Presence, Virgo's Wet Nurse. You're actually fighting these giant elder gods, but in contrast to Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, it's presented in a different way because Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth was all about supposed to be making the player feel small and insignificant and powerless despite the fact that you could kill Cthulhu. Whereas Bloodborne is all about the inherent power and badassness of the main character. Everything about the character is designed towards making the player feel like an unstoppable, badass killing machine. If any of you have played the Dark Souls series, you'll know that the message you get when you defeat a boss is victory achieved. So, representative of overcoming insurmountable odds despite everything. But in Bloodborne, when you defeat a boss, the message you get is prey slaughtered. So you were the overdog in this scenario all along, and everything should have been fearing you this entire time. Yeah, and in contrast to, at the beginning I mentioned that coming into contact with this unknowable knowledge will drive most people insane. The only way to achieve true victory, so the best ending of the game, is to achieve the hidden knowledge both literally and figuratively. You wouldn't know to look for the way to achieve this ultimate end is through finding these three, basically, tokens throughout the game, which you wouldn't know where to look for them, pretty much unless you looked online. So literally achieving hidden knowledge online and achieving hidden knowledge within the world. And yeah, that's the main thing. Yes?
Oh, first I was going to say, are you taking questions? Or?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Feel free to correct me on any of these details. The one that the fishing hamlet is based on, it's like Ismir, I believe, the story.
I believe the...
In Bloodborne.
The fishing hamlet, I believe, is most directly based off the Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yeah.
Although in the original story, the people of the town were originally just notionally normal-looking people, and there were deep ones hiding in the waters, whereas the fishing hamlet is all just the deep ones.
Is that the one that has, like, uncomfortable racial commentary also?
Yes. One thing that I considered mentioning at the beginning, but Lovecraft was kind of uncomfortably racist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even for the time, he was quite racist.
And, yeah, I was just confirming that, but the point is, like, I use it myself because of the Bloodborne Dark Souls, how it champions minimalism. Do you think that's a good way to broach the topic in terms of the Lovecraftian elements? Or just as you just said, just say, oh, he was even for his time and just leave it at that? Or do you think there's something we can learn from that?
Well, the thing about the Shadow over Innsmouth is that it's basically just a giant metaphor for interracial mixing.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the things. So in the fishing hamlet, it's more implied that the people of the fishing hamlet were always that way rather than the Shadow over Innsmouth method, whereby the people of the town were bred with the deep ones to create these offsprings, which the protagonist later turns out to be, but that's neither here nor there. But that's an example of using the aesthetic elements without necessarily taking the deeper meaning behind it. So you could say that the fishing hamlet is inspired by the Shadow over Innsmouth, but that's not taking the racial connotations, just the aesthetic elements.
It is one of the areas that's not particularly minimalistic, like they want you to like feel anger towards the hunters in the game and stuff like that, but it's still just the overarching minimalism of the series. I think it's an interesting commentary.
Yeah, definitely a lot of the premise of the Soulsborne series is discovering story just through gameplay and elements within the game world rather than cutscenes.
Thank you.
In the back.
Well, oh yeah, my apologies for walking in and out, but I was curious if you talked about Pandemic Cthulhu.
Pandemic Cthulhu, that is the board game, correct?
Correct.
I'm afraid I didn't. Would you like, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on it then, or?
No, unfortunately I don't know that much about it. Would you be able to explain it a little?
It's Pandemic with a Cthulhu background, but it does add in an element of play based upon insanity and madness, so it's not just a cheap expansion that you see with games such as Munchkin.
Yeah. I mean, going back to this game, The Consuming Shadow, a big part of that game is that as you go throughout the game, the map on which you're trying to explore and find resources is slowly overtaken by these Lovecraftian forces. Have any of you played FTL? Yeah, it's directly inspired by that, so the Rebel fleet slowly invading the galaxy behind you, or the star system behind you, is directly mirrored by the Lovecraftian elements slowly taking over the world behind you, slowly decreasing the amount of space you have to look for different things. Anything else? Yeah, I'm sorry, this panel's a lot shorter than I thought it'd be, just because I thought there'd be more stuff. But, anyone have any questions or anything? Topics of conversation? In the back.
Do you think there's also oversaturation with the Cthulhu thing? Like it's a...
Yes, if it was a yes or no question, I'd say yes, because we seem to be seeing a lot of things that take aesthetically from the Lovecraft mythos, so you'll see no end of Cthulhu and Lovecraft themed stuff. I do think we're not getting enough truly cosmic horror type things. Yeah, just as I described it, it's very difficult to portray a feeling of powerlessness in a medium that's all about giving the player power and seeing what they do with it and gaining and losing power. I'd like to see more cosmic horror games.
My experience with Lovecraft is very limited per se to reading a pastiche that came out years ago called The Model of Cthulhu, and then seeing some speedruns of some Lovecraft space games. Where's a good place to start with Lovecraft? Reading things like that and learning.
If you're looking to, if you don't know anything about the Lovecraft mythos, I would actually recommend starting off with Bloodborne. Bloodborne, just because it is a very fun game. It's probably the best game I've seen in that series, and it does some pretty interesting things with the Cthulhu mythos.
What does body horror mean again? I feel like I have
body horror. That's something you see more in horror movies. You'll see it all the time in Japanese horror cinema, but body horror is the idea of things grossly and viscerally changing into other things. So, have you seen Rick and Morty? Sorry. But yeah, you
I
can
think
see
it's one of those words I've heard recently, not just in this context, and I'm like, oh, but yeah.
but yeah, it's destruction and just distorting of the body.
You had mentioned, I think you used the word Cronenberg earlier,
Yes.
so like...
Yeah, that's where I heard it,
or something like that, or...
They were talking
Yeah,
about
the
it as
fly.
part of the genre.
Oh, so like
Or even
mutation?
parts of scanners.
Yes, yeah, slowly mutating the body. Have you seen RoboCop?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good
Yes.
example too, yeah.
Yeah, so that, and particularly the fate of I forget what the Weasley guy who got submerged in the acid at the end.
Meal.
Yeah, I feel like that would kind of apply as body horror.
They certainly seem to have fun with the makeup there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, RoboCop is just fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any RPGs, like board game RPGs?
Yes, there's a Call of Cthulhu RPG, which seems very good. There are a couple other, that's the main like pen and paper RPG.
Uh-huh.
There are a couple other ones, including Arkham Horror, which I've seen good things about. Admittedly, I don't have much time to play board games because I don't have any friends who like to play board games, so it would be a very lonely board game experience for me.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on something I read recently. Because there's the whole big thing about the leaked Half-Life 2 Episode 3 story that came out. And there was a comment that I read where someone compared the overall feel of the Half-Life series to a Lovecraft kind of feel.
Yeah.
Where, you know, the humans are insignificant.
Yeah. Yeah, admittedly I haven't read the synopsis of that, but looking at the overall story of the Half-Life series, it is interesting looking at the role of humanity, because it's less that humanity is insignificant, it's more like humanity is part of a much bigger story throughout the universe, particularly with things like the G-Man. Yeah, he seems to have something to do with Gordon Freeman. It's a bit ambiguous as to what his motivations are or what his stake in this whole thing is. But it's less about humanity's individual efforts and more just part of a much broader chess game throughout the universe. I mean, Half-Life 1, you're going in and usurping an alien queen who had taken over a different alien planet. Yeah, a much smaller part of a much bigger universe.
They definitely seem to have the aesthetic characteristics with a lot of their character or monster designs.
Yeah, a fair bit. I mean, Lovecraft is all about his alien designs, and depending on how you want to look at it, the head crabs are inspired by the facehuggers from Alien, and Alien was inspired by At the Mountains of Madness. In fact, if you look at Alien as basically At the Mountains of Madness but in space, it's basically the same thing. I mean, the xenomorph is basically just a Shoggoth, but basically a giant rape monster, but... yes. Yeah, were there any things that you felt I didn't go into enough detail on? Or didn't explain well enough? Yeah, just,
For the body horror stuff, you could bring up a couple more, like, examples that they have, like, have you ever watched Wishmaster, like an old horror movie called Wishmaster?
I'm afraid I haven't,
It's
actually.
with the genie that basically, basically he does a lot of body horror stuff.
Oh,
Because people like summon him, but he's like an evil genie, and he distorts wishes and basically makes people like their bodies distorted.
Well, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So yeah, Wishmaster, yeah, you'll see it a lot in Japanese horror cinema, particularly some of the weirder stuff. Suicide Club apparently has this scene with in a bowling alley, and I haven't seen it, but nothing good horror-related happens in a bowling alley.
Akira?
Oh, yes, Acura. Yes, definitely. The entire ending scene of Acura, if you've seen that, yeah, that is all giant body horror type stuff.
I guess the other thing would be like maybe more about Cthulhu, because that seems to be something that a lot of people know about, and they think Cthulhu just looks like this squid-faced thing.
Yeah.
Really, no one's really able to look at Cthulhu, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about Cthulhu is that he's not even the biggest, scariest monster out there.
Yeah.
He's actually relatively small on the cosmic scale of things. There's this being called Azathoth that the mad, dumb god, I believe he's referred to in universe. And the popular theory is that we all just exist as dreams being dreamed up by Azathoth. Yeah, he's being kept in a perpetual state of sleep because if he ever wakes up, we're all going to disappear, elder gods included. I mean, you'll see Lovecraft type stuff all over. You won't necessarily see it in just in a cosmic horror setting or just in a setting that understands what cosmic horror is about.
There's literally no way for anybody to know that.
I mean, Quake has... Dang, I forgot what... the exact name of the monster is, but the black sheep, the black goat with 1,000 young. That's the final boss, and he just kind of running around, pressing switches, and it dies.
Remember.
Yeah, the entire point of Cosmic Horror is less that there's a giant monster trying to bite your face off, it's more that there's these things that are looming over us all the time, like a giant sword of Damocles, and we're just going to have to continue on pretending like it doesn't exist in order to function like normal human beings. It's a very nihilistic type of horror. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts or anything? Yeah. If I thought I'd known it was this short, I would have done more stuff.